There was one point where he stormed into the room and ripped people apart for laughing. He could hear some people laughing, having a conversation and laughing, and that was unacceptable. What was interesting, that 50% of people described other people as theory X. Both can't be true. Either many people are deluded about themselves, or people are deluded about other people. Whipping people will work in the short, but it's not sustainable and it's not ethical either.
Exactly.
Psychological safety is quite a precise phenomenon. It's not it's not just a sense of general well-being, or it's not a sense of comfort necessarily. It's certainly not an absence of conflict. A highly psychologically safe team may actually exhibit greater conflict, but it'll be healthier, more productive conflict than in a less psychologically safe team, where you may see no conflict at all because everyone's too afraid to even say to any deemed mistakes after they happen. Like no one makes mistakes, in a sense. Like, we don't intend to make mistakes. We also like to encourage being blame aware rather than blameless, because in a weird way, trying to be blameless can result in a weird dynamic where people get blamed for blaming. Work doesn't have to suck. We've embedded this weird belief that if we're enjoying it, then it's not.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cybersyn Labs podcast, where we explore multidisciplinary insights that help improve the effectiveness of tech leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs. Today's guest is Tom Geraghty. He's an organizational ecologist, the founder and the CEO of Psychological Safety, psychsafety.com. And as you can guess, today's core topic is going to be centered around psychological safety and human and organizational performance. I can't wait to dive deep into these topics with Tom. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. All right, so let's dive right in. So, Tom, you started your career as an ecologist. Literally, your first title was experimentalist. And then you moved into technology, CIO, CTO roles. And then you finally landed what you're doing right now, which is psychological safety. For a podcast that's rooted in systems thinking and cybernetics, I find this a fascinating trajectory. So my first question to you is, how did your ecological experience and training shape the way you think about organizations today?
So it's a really nice question, right? Because I will also say that experimentalist is definitely my coolest. It was my first job title, my coolest one. I've never quite beaten that since. But yeah, so ecology is the study of all living things and living systems, right? It's essentially the systems and complexity aspect of the natural world, and what kind of is, I was going to say one of the things you learn straight away, but you don't. It's not even explicitly taught in ecology, but it's implicit throughout the whole field that you cannot engineer natural systems in a mechanistic positivist kind of way, right? And so
Yes.
you can't skip straight to the outcome. You can't say we want this and just make it. You can't say we want a native broad-leaved biodiverse woodland there and plant it. That's not going to work. You've got to create the conditions for that to emerge, and it's going to take time and nudges, and it'll be unpredictable, and things, you'll try things that might not work, and things will go in different directions to what you're expecting, and that's and that is how we work with organizations, right? That's organizational work as well, and so we can and many people do, rightfully so, think of organizations as ecosystems.
Yes. I think the saying, you can't design for emergence, comes to mind. And also, I think there's an old quote about leadership where, if the flowers don't bloom, you can't blame the flowers. You can only fix the environment. So these two quotes come to mind.
Yeah.
What you said is true. It's not easy for everyone to kind of connect the dots between how an ecology works and how an organization works, because most mainstream leaders here in Silicon Valley have a very mechanistic view of the organization.
Mm. Yeah.
So your about page describes a moment of working in an environment that cultivated fear, where people were
Mm.
afraid to speak up, suggest new ideas, or admit mistakes. And the business was going backwards. So take us back to that moment. What was the failure you were witnessing? And something that made you think, I need to dedicate my career to solving this, which is psychological safety. Please
Yeah.
tell us more.
Yeah. So I think for me, so I joined an organization, a large organization, as a senior infrastructure engineer or something like that.
Mhm.
And the CIO, or the IT director, I think, who he was called, was, and so so he ruled by fear. He was very much a command control,
Mhm.
dictate how things were meant to be, uh, uh, not accepting of any degree of failures. Failure was not an option. Um, and um, and he and that was his approach to management. And I the reason you might sense a bit of sort of caution in my voice is because I don't want to give the impression that he was a bad person.
Mm.
He he was doing his job to the best of his abilities in the way that he believed would get the right results. Right?
Mm.
He thought he was doing the right thing. And there were many ways he was a good leader and capable, but in this very core way, he'd made, in my opinion, and I think in many others, some bad decisions about his approaches. Um, and he would, there are various stories, like he would come into the room and rip someone apart for making some minor mistake or something and not going quite to plan. And there was one point where he stormed into the room and ripped people apart for laughing. He could hear some people laughing, having a conversation and laughing, and that was unacceptable. So you can sense the kind of leader, but so it wasn't a very nice place to work. That was one thing. It wasn't. It had we had a high turnover rate. People
Mm.
didn't stick around very long if they had somewhere else to go, and so that's a bad thing for the people and for the organization. But what I saw as well, what I started to pick up on as well, was how ridiculously slow everything was. And everything was getting out of date and falling behind, and and the company, the organization was suffering because servers wouldn't get patched for ages because the act of patching involved a risk. It was safer to plan and articulate and roadmap your way through everything,
Yeah.
document every single step, even for tiny little things, to cover your ass, basically. Um, and so nothing ever got changed, nothing ever got suggested, because the act of changing anything or doing anything always
Mm.
invoked risk, and risk was what got you screamed at. And
Yeah.
so it was safer to do nothing, if at all possible, do nothing. And so it really calcified, it really held the organization back, and you could really see this. And I began to see this dynamic, but I couldn't at the time, particularly because I was in it. It's hard to describe it when you're in it, but at the time I couldn't really describe what exactly was going on. And it was only after I left, really, that, and I able to reflect back, that I
Mm.
realized I sort of joined the dots and could see what was going on. And it was that. So a few years later, I discovered the term psychological safety,
Mm.
and it was the term psychological safety. So after having that job, my role then was a manager, as a leader, and I almost tried to do the opposite of what my past managers.
Mm.
If that was bad, what was good? I was trying to do what was good, but I still didn't have a language for it. I still didn't have the terminology, and that was when I discovered the term psychological safety. That was when suddenly I had the language for the thing that I was trying to do and articulate all that time. Just
Yeah.
up to the point, I couldn't frame it. I couldn't articulate it.
You were able to you found the words to describe the environment you were embedded in, or the environment that particular leader created,
Yeah.
whether it's deliberate or unintentional.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. I found the words. Well, I found the words to describe the opposite of what that leader created, and
yes,
the
yes,
absence of that essentially. But
yes,
having that language enabled me to articulate, if that's one end of the spectrum, then what's the other end, right?
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking about humans and how they behave, I'm kind of curious about your overall worldview. One, about fundamental human nature itself. An example, obviously, is McGregor's Theory X versus Theory
Mm.
Y. And then the lens that you use to view organizations itself. I've seen some of my previous podcast guests kind of use the viable systems model. I don't think you stick to a particular model or framework, anything like that. But I'm just kind of curious, like, how has your worldview changed about people and organizations as such?
That's good. It's a good point about how it's changed. So I think, but on the Theory X and Theory Y thing, I think it's really interesting. I I sometimes get these the wrong way around. But Theory X is the belief that people need to be driven and told
Hmm.
what to do, isn't it? And Theory
Hmm.
Y is that people are self motivated and have intrinsic motivation and want to do a good job, essentially. What's really so I did some research years ago now. I did a big survey and asked people to describe themselves with a rate agreement, yes or no, with these various statements. And pretty much basically everyone described themselves as Theory Y. Everyone. What was interesting, that 50% of people described other people as Theory X. So, both can't be true. Either people are deluded, either many people are deluded about themselves, or people are deluded about other people. And if we explore sort of various biases and heuristics and things like that, things like the fundamental attribution error, um, and the group attribution error and the ultimate attribution error and things like that, then we see that we are somewhat inclined sometimes to think of other people as we assign to their character what should be explainable and what is explainable actually by context.
Hmm.
And that I feel is at the sort of root of this dichotomy between these two worldviews. And so I lean very much towards, people want to do the right thing. People want to do the good thing. People want to come home after a day's work feeling like they did good stuff, feeling like they made a difference, and it was worth them being there, and people appreciate them, and 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 it's up to leaders to create the conditions in which that can be true.
Mm. I think talking about people's behavior without talking about the context in which they are embedded
Yeah,
can also be misleading. So I
yeah,
totally get where you're coming from.
yeah.
Uh, so before we dive into the core topics themselves, I'm curious, what are some of the books, talks, papers that are behind the ideas that underpin your practice today? What are some of the things that profoundly influenced you?
That's a good question. And so there's a lot, as you can see it behind me. I'm an avid book, at least collector, and I try to read most of them. So, and there are so many, right? And so, one of the first books that introduced me to, I guess it introduced me to sort of human factors and things like that,
Mm.
was Atul Gawan's Checklist Manifesto.
Oh, yeah.
And that, you know, it you could argue that it's somewhat simplistic and sort of treats the checklist as like a golden hammer to solve every problem. But,
Mhm.
that's what books do, especially a book called the Checklist Manifesto. But that introduced me to a whole new world of different domains like aviation and surgery and all sorts of different fields and domains that I'd never had really much experience in or exposure to, and that introduced me to that just opened lots of doors for me at the time.
Yeah.
And I'd always been sort of vaguely interested in people like Deming,
Mhm.
and sort of systems thinking and his system of profound knowledge and things like that. But in terms of sort of more modern books, that was when it opened many doors, and then from there it's just gone wild. We've got Amy Edmondson's Phyllis Organization, which is a great book that opened lots of doors around psychological safety. All of Decker's work, all of Carsten Bush, Todd Conklin. Actually, we should go back in time as well to Mary Parker Follett and her work, and that's that was written in the. I mean, some of that work was written in the 19th century. That was written before.
Yes.
That was written before
Yes.
Taylor.
Power with instead of power
Exactly.
over. Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a great list. Before we talk about psychological safety and HOP, which is human and organizational performance, I want to co-diagnose with you as to how we got to now. We know what the status quo is. Of course, I'm coming at it from a Silicon Valley technology corporation's perspective, having lived here and worked here for about 16 years. I'm curious about your thoughts about what's fundamentally broken in mainstream organizations, in mainstream management.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot here, but I think Taylor. We've just mentioned Taylor and sort of scientific management and Ford and sort of those sorts of paradigms, those sorts of people with those sorts of paradigms, these sort of reductionist, positivist, mechanistic approaches to management and leadership, which are at the core of what is at least a lot of what is wrong with organizations, or dysfunctional, shall we say, about organizations. Those sort of approaches lead to dysfunctions. The problem is a lot of those approaches work in the short term, and there's a lot of things that work in the short term. Whipping people will work in the short. But it's not sustainable and it's not ethical either.
Exactly.
But there are an awful lot of management practices and leadership approaches that are neither sustainable nor ethical, but because they often get short-term results at the expense of long-term results and long-term sustainability and the impact on people. That short-termism, like so much is what's wrong with the world, that short-termism is an awful lot of what's wrong, and particularly the lack of recognition that it is short-termism.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of contributing factors there. I think Deming was the one who talked about how mobility of management, as he put it, impedes a leader to have a systemic view of the organization. And anybody can improve the performance or profits by cutting costs and cutting corners, compromising on quality. That's going to work only for a short term. But then in the long term, you're going to destroy shareholder value, the exact thing that we're chasing. So let's dive into your core topic and one of my topics that I'm passionate about, which is psychological safety. And at least for a lot of people here in the Valley, Amy Edmondson's name from Google's Project Aristotle comes up when they talk about psychological safety. But I know for sure that the intellectual history of psychological safety goes way back. So can you please kind of walk us through the lineage and also talk about what gets lost when we only talk about the recent waves?
Yeah, so it's what's really interesting, right? Because there's a lot of and there's an understandable belief that psychological safety is a new thing, like it's a new phenomenon, or it's maybe even a new fad. But it's really not. So the term first emerged in the 1950s with Carl Rogers, the OG humanistic therapist, psychologist. And he wrote in a series of essays, and he wrote a piece called Toward a Theory of Creativity, where he talks about the psychological safety being elements of psychological safety being unconditional worth and freedom from external valuation. So unconditional worth, we're talking there about the sense that we as human beings shouldn't be judged, or our worth is not judged by what we know or what we've done or what we can do or what we're capable of. We have fundamental worth as human beings, and it's this environment free of external judgment or evaluation. And he was talking about, this was in the context of a therapist and client, but then, and so this is the seed of the idea. We're not saying this is the idea as it is now, but this is the seed of the idea. And then Ed Schein and Robin Benson, Ed Schein of Humble Inquiry, they were writing about organizational change through group methods, and referred to psychological safety as they were sort of talking about the sense, they were talking about this safety to experiment, but in their context, it was the safety to do things that might not succeed in the workplace. And of course, all work might not succeed.
Yes.
It doesn't, we're not guaranteed an outcome. We're entitled to the fruits. We're entitled to the labor, but not the fruits of our labor, right?
Yeah.
And so this sense of safety in trying things that might not work or might fail in some way, that's the evolution of it. And then you've got Kahn in the 1990s, who began to formalize the idea, certainly academically, and then Amy Edmondson introduced the now canonical definition of psychological safety as a sense, a belief in a group that we won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, and mistakes. And like you were saying with Project Aristotle, what's interesting kind of here is that from that point on, psychological safety began to be a reasonably well-known concept within academia. But it was still, but for 15 or so years, it remained a concept about the workplace, not in the workplace. It was about the people in the workplace, not for or with the people in the workplace. And it was Project Aristotle, in fact, a New York Times article about Project Aristotle that kind of blew it up and catalyzed interest in psychological safety in, I'm going to say in quotes, the real world, but like the world of work rather than the world of academia, the practice of work rather than the study of work. Yeah. And then, since then it's somewhat blown up since then and evolved, and it continues to evolve, and there's still a great deal of work to do, I should say. It's still an evolving, emergent concept, an idea that a lot of gaps, particularly in academia. The field itself is still relatively Western, white collar, very neurotypical. And so there's a lot of gaps to fill still.
Well said. As it rises in popularity, any concept for that matter, there's always a risk that psychological safety becomes just a buzzword that gets co-opted or watered down or confused with being nice or conflict avoidance. For those that have never heard about the term itself, for the listeners of the podcast, can you explain what psychological safety actually is and what it emphatically is not, in a way that drives it home for a technology executive in the Valley?
Yeah, no. So there are lots of different ways to think about what it is, and Amy Edmondson's definition is one way in. We can also think of it, if we were going to be quite concise about it, we can also think of it as positive interpersonal predictability. That is a sense that I or you, anyone in a group, can make a relatively confident prediction that if they take an interpersonal risk, the outcome will be relatively positive, i.e., they'll it'll be positive for them. They won't incur
For
negative
both of them.
Yeah. Well, for them, just for the person taking the risk, because that's ultimately we only reside in our own heads, right? And this is part of the thing. It is, and this is, I find this language often lands quite well with sort of tech folks and executives because it's more techy. But the concept is a the tacit calculus of voice, is what we call it, or and the affect laden calculus of voice. And essentially, we weigh up the costs of speaking. We weigh up the cost of saying a thing, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's an idea or whether it's asking, what does that mean, or how does that work, or why do we do this that way?
Yeah.
We weigh up the costs of saying the thing versus the expected benefits of it, and we're talking about the expected benefits primarily to ourselves. Whilst there may be benefits to the organization, those benefits to the organization will also benefit ourselves in some way, but they become diluted and they're far away and they're less certain. And then if we draw on, if you're familiar with prospect theory, and Daniel Kahneman and thinking fast and slow. So Kahneman and Tversky came up with prospect theory back in the 70s. Essentially, I won't get too deep into it, but essentially what this means, this is about essentially humans are somewhat irrational. We don't make calculated, rational economic decisions. We are loss averse. We catastrophize, and we diminish far away or future benefits and things. So essentially what we're saying is the calculus always leans slightly towards the costs. We always overestimate, we over-egg the negative outcomes compared to the positive ones. And the reason, so coming back to the positive interpersonal predictability kind of idea, is that we need to be able to predict it. We need to have data in the first place. So if we walk into a room and we don't know, there's a load of people and we don't know who they are, we've never met any of these people before, we don't know what they're talking about, and then we're asked a question about something, we can't even make that calculation. So we tend to defer, we tend to default to caution, to being careful, to reducing the potential risk and negative impact on us as a result. So the outcome of this is that in order to foster psychological safety, we need to both create the scaffold, make the framework of the group, of the dynamic, of the team, of the process. We need to make that legible. We need to understand what it means to be in this space, and we need to model that when interpersonal risks are taken, the reaction is positive.
Yeah.
And this is the point. Psychological safety is quite a precise phenomenon. It's not sort of it's not just a sense of general well-being, or it's not a sense of comfort necessarily. It's certainly not an absence of conflict. A highly psychologically safe team may actually exhibit greater conflict, but it'll be healthier, more productive conflict than in a less psychologically safe team, where you may see no conflict at all because everyone's too afraid to even say anything. No one wants to rock the boat. So this is one of the ironic things about psychological safety. A team that look psychologically safe on the outside may in fact very much not be, and another team that look like there's a lot of conflict and a lot of argument or debate, we may infer that that's psychologically unsafe, but it's not necessarily the case, of course.
Yeah, I think the nuance there matters. I think as we speak, one of the things that came to mind was there was this popular experiment around victimhood mindset. I think what they did was basically they took a bunch of people and they put a makeup on their face as if they had a visible disfigurement, like a scar or something. It's just a makeup. And then before they sent them for the job interview, they actually erased it without their knowledge. And the vast majority of them, after they completed that interaction, actually felt like a victim. They started complaining about people staring at their scar or whatever visible disfigurement on their face, even though it did not exist. And so there's this idea in constructivism in the sense that we construct our worldview. I mean, in the physical reality, for sure, like colors actually don't exist in the real world, in the universe. They exist only inside our heads. So does sound. And so the social realm, which is what we live inside our heads most of the time, is also then constructed or imagined. And so how do you strike that balance? Because visually, as you said, when you put it, when you look at people, clashing and debating, you may feel like it's not psychologically safe, but it might be. And
Mm.
so how do you pull out that nuance? How do you detect that nuance?
I think, we often make the point that psychological safety looks different for everyone.
Mm,
And it really is true. We all inhabit different bodies and different minds, and we have wildly varying um, past histories and upbringings and careers and everything else. And what we what we bring to a space is an amalgamation, an aggregation of all those past experiences, um,
yes.
and 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 beliefs and norms and
Yes.
fears and desires and targets and incentives and everything else. And 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 at the same time, and this is where the culture and neurodiversity comes into it a lot.
Mm,
There's a there's a lot of quite worrying literature around psychological safety that says things like to maintain greater psychological safety, maintain sustained eye contact with people.
mm,
Like, I mean, for one thing, maintaining sustained eye contact with someone just looks weird to most people. If you're intentionally, it feels strange. And
yeah.
you probably can't put a finger on why, but it feels odd. And then, um, but this was one very small study done at Harvard actually, and but it completely disregards any cultural differences, cultural norms around whether eye contact is appropriate or respectful. So many Japanese cultures and many African cultures
Mm,
consider sustained eye contact with someone who is senior to you or an elder to you or something like that to be disrespectful. So
yes.
so if you walk into a Japanese boardroom with a bunch of executives and the CEO is addressing them from the top of the table, you're likely to, you're not necessarily, but you may see that the executives are looking down at the table or or somewhere else other than looking at the CEO. And whereas if you took that and applied and did that same thing in a for San Francisco boardroom, for example,
Yeah.
people, the CEO would probably be like, why aren't you paying attention?
Yeah.
Look at me when I'm talking to you, sort of like approach. Because, and so, we have to be really careful that we're not applying these stereotypical Western normative
Mhm.
kind of framings to psychological safety. And we're not, we're not assuming that what works for us, what is right for us is right for anyone else. Uh,
Yes.
and neurodiversity plays a big part here as well. And we're just talking about eye contact here, but
Yeah.
for many neurodiverse folks, eye contact is
Yeah.
is difficult to the point of being impossible. So asking them to maintain eye contact with someone to help them feel psychologically safe is just forcing them to expend so much cognitive energy on eye contact that they're not actually able to spend any energy on the thing that they're actually talking about. So,
Yeah.
um, it's different for everyone. And going back to what we were talking about at the start, it's complex, right? It's complex and nuanced and ever changing and evolving
Mhm.
and it's an ever moving phenomena. So we're never going to reach this sort of end state.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the lived experience of the people working in that environment, they know it when they're in one.
Yeah, yeah,
And we can't probably describe it in words as external participants or
yeah,
observers.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, awesome. So you actually teach multiple models and frameworks rather than advocating for like single best
Yeah.
practice or best one. And you also critically examine wrong models that organizations typically use, and you explore different diagnostic tools. And
Mhm.
so, with all of those interactions and workshops and consulting engagements that you've done in the past, what do you think are the most common conceptual mistakes you see organizations make when they think they understand psychological safety,
Mhm.
but in reality they don't?
This is a nice question. I think it comes down to sort of there are two main, I was going to say mistakes, but two main areas to make. Well, and one's about measurement. I'll come back to measurement and metrics in a moment. And one is about the process and the model or the idea, the phenomenon itself and how it works. And so going right back to the start, right? There's a lot of models out there that frame a kind of linear step change stages sort of model. There's a model called the 4 stages, which has essentially no empirical evidence supporting it whatsoever, but is very popular because it's very simple. It's very simple, and it gives this seductive illusion of being able to go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4, and it's also very sort of leadery and endows a lot of power onto the leader. In fact, but one might argue that the 4 stages model exacerbates the very problem that it's purportedly trying to fix. And so there's a danger in just seeing a simplistic model or framework of psychological safety itself and thinking that that's the truth. And once you start chasing that, then you're chasing something, you're doing something, but it's probably not psychological safety, and it may well be doing more harm than good. In fact, we often find that it can result in more harm than good, if particularly when you're looking at the least safe people on the team, who tend to be the least well represented. For example, neurodiverse folks, or they might be the only gay person on a team, or the only person using a wheelchair on the team, or whatever makes that person different on the team. Lots of these linear these overly simplistic models actually make it worse for those already least safe, least well represented people. Yep. The other one, as I said, is metrics. This idea that you can diagnose and you can score and measure accurately in some kind of metric, dashboardy sort of way, the level of psychological safety on a team, as if there was a psychological safety ometer that you can sort of in a team and go, bing, it's now at 4.5. Yesterday it was 4.2. So we're doing great, aren't we, guys? Like, it's and yet while there is value to be had in surveys and metrics, they need to be applied very carefully, intelligently, and lightly, because the very act of measuring changes the thing itself, right? And we see lots of this, and again, an awful lot of these survey tools and methodologies they come from a very Western, neurotypical, white collar kind of context. They don't they often begin to break down once you try to apply it beyond those sorts of contexts. And of course, basically every context in the world is not as simple as the model as the idea that it was founded upon. And so a lot of these diagnostic tools, they're very easy to sell. This is why they're so popular. They're easy to sell. They're very seductive. They're very attractive for organizations and leaders to be able to sort of buy a package off a shelf and go, right, we're going to do this. We're going to run this survey, run this tool, do this diagnostic, and then and identify the bad people or the wrong people or the behaviors or things like that, and then just fix them. And it doesn't work like that.
What's that? The Silicon Valley executives drive to quantify something and put a number on it and then just try and improve it is ever so present.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of work around human and organizational performance, or HOP. So for listeners who are unfamiliar with what HOP is, can you please first explain what it is and distinguish it from conventional safety management approaches and kind of link it back to psychological safety as well?
Yeah. So there's a lot of debate and quite, shall we say, lively debate on this topic. So I'll just caveat everything with that. So HOP is part of a shift in approaches that it includes approaches known as safety 2, or the new view of safety, or safety differently. and things like that. And essentially, it takes a more progressive, I would say, humanistic, system thinking, complexity informed sort of approach to safety and the broader environment in which safety emerges. And the corollary to that, so the traditional or conventional view on safety is safety one, and essentially, the model would suggest that safety one primarily is about trying to reduce the number of things that goes wrong, and that's a valid thing to do. Like, nobody's saying that you shouldn't do that, because
Yeah.
that's good. We want fewer things to go wrong.
An example would be like days since last injury on the factory
Yeah,
floor or something like that. Right.
yeah, or like we want fewer people to be injured, and that's great. We want fewer people to be injured at work, and that's good, because everyone should go home from work in the same physical state they got to work,
Mhm.
right? And that's good. That's fair. What safety do kind of does is say, well, yes, that's great, but you could achieve that by doing zero work. You could achieve that by just not going to work in the first place. Um, and so the danger is that the framing of safety is problematic, because safety is more of a capacity. It's more about the capacity to do work and achieve things with as fewer bad outcomes as possible,
Mhm.
as fewer and less serious bad outcomes as possible. And because there is inherent risk in work, safety two also. So there's a you can also argue that safety one takes a sort of approach that if only people would comply and just follow the process and do their job and just follow that instruction to the letter, everything will be fine and they'll be safe
Mhm.
and we'll get a good result. And safety two takes a rather more progressive approach, which is that, and the kind of real world approach, I'd have to say, that people are the people at the sharp end of the
Mhm.
of work. So the people doing the work at the sharp end of work, where there's more pointy things, there's more opportunity to get hurt, are constantly adapting. They're constantly reacting, sensing, adapting, and changing the way they do work in response to the changing and evolving context in which they, they might be working on a machine um, and something, something stuck on the machine. So they have to slightly change the way that they're running this process on this occasion, so that to get the job done, or whatever it is. And this, and this is true in health. Like, this is massively true in healthcare. We work with a
Mhm.
lot of healthcare teams, and basically everyone you speak to in healthcare at the sharp end, nurses, doctors, surgeons, and everyone else would say, yeah, it is incredibly rare that you'll be able to follow any procedure to the letter. And in fact, there are so many procedures and compliance documents and policies and things in healthcare that you simply cannot comply with all of them, because there are too many of them to know about. There are too many of them to remember. They keep changing so often you can't keep track of them, and they often conflict with each other.
Yeah.
So, so safety two takes the approach that workers are the solution, not the problem. Workers are the reason that work is safe. This adaptation, this constant adaptation and um, expert-led adaptation to complexity is the reason that work succeeds most of the time. And that's
Mhm.
the mental premise behind these sort of more progressive approaches.
Yeah. I get the paradigm shift from safety one to safety two.
Yeah.
Assuming we're in favor of understanding how things go right most of the time, how does this shift in thinking or approach change what managers should actually pay attention to? And how do they behave in such an environment? What should they change?
There's a good few points here. So one is the recognition that an over rotation on safety one type approaches tends to result in ever increasing levels of bureaucracy, paperwork, compliance,
Mhm.
policies, procedures, and things like that. And
Interesting.
because because basically, if something goes wrong, we create a new policy, or we change the policy, or we
Mhm.
add policy. And and we see this in organizations all the time, right?
Yes.
No one ever gets punished for 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 binning a policy or procedure. No one ever sorry, no one ever gets. So the incentive is always to create more policies,
Mhm.
create more procedures. No one ever gets praised for deleting one or getting rid of one and saying we don't need that anymore. Um,
Mhm.
because the danger is that if something does go wrong, then the finger will be pointed at them, right?
Yeah.
And so there's this inclination in organizations to just keep on creating more rules, more paperwork, more policies, more procedures, and check that people are complying with it. So if you're seeing in your organization an ever increasing bulk of compliance and policy and procedure and stuff like that, then maybe there's an over rotation on safety one. Maybe it's at its core is a belief that if workers would only follow procedure, then everything will be fine.
Yeah.
And in fact, that is not true. We may want it to be true, but it's not true. And so safety two or HOP or whatever we look at takes another view, but it doesn't completely get rid of safety one. We still have to do some of that work, but it takes the view that we should ask what workers need to get their jobs done and to do their best job possible and give it to them.
Yeah.
And if someone is not complying with the policy or making constant, or if there are people making constant mistakes or frequent mistakes, then look more at the system. Ask them what they need in order to make fewer mistakes. And of course, mistakes as a whole, like another jar of worms, right? Because mistakes are only deemed mistakes after they happen. Like no one makes mistakes in a sense. Like we don't intend to make mistakes. We deem them mistakes after they happened, and we don't intend to make mistakes. And so look at the context, look at the tooling, and talk to people. Talk to people about what they need and what would help them get their job done better, safer, more effectively, higher quality, whatever it is they're trying to do. Listen, and fundamentally, we're often talking about the same thing. Listen to people, but also make it safe for them to tell you what actually matters. Because if we're not fostering psychological safety, this has to come first, right? If we're not fostering psychological safety, we ask people what they need, or how they're actually doing the work. What the difference between work is done and work is imagined. Then we won't hear the truth. We won't hear, and if we then improve systems or things based upon this sort of safe fiction, we're actually only making it worse because we're creating new policies and procedures. We're changing how we think the organization works based upon this fiction that we've been told because we haven't made it safe for them to tell us the truth.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Like psychological safety from that lens is a necessary condition for organizations to succeed, but not necessarily a sufficient condition.
Yeah.
That alone is not enough. But without that, any of the other improvements or interventions that you're trying will eventually lead to ineffective outcomes because people are not able to speak their mind and tell you the truth. What's the ground reality?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Where do you think Silicon Valley is? Let me actually kind of connect that to another concept that you talk about, which is just culture.
Yeah.
It kind of as it sits at the intersection of HOP, resilience engineering, retrospectives, and so on and so forth. In tech organizations, you have these ideas, or at least not every company has it in Silicon Valley. At least a lot of companies that I know and respect have these ideas, which is around blameless postmortems. They do retrospectives, incident reviews, where they don't point the finger at a human and say, human error, you did this mistake, and so you're going to be punished. That is not acceptable, which is awesome. But at the same company, in parallel, also exists performance ratings, stack ranking, performance improvement plans, and layoffs, and all of those things. And so I kind of feel like it's like a cognitive dissonance. Like you have these two things that are fundamentally, they're not compatible at all, and yet we're forced into living these double lives. Do you think that's sustainable? Where do you think it's leading us?
I think that tension in itself is kind of fascinating and concerning, because there's, and I will say this is particularly unique, or maybe not unique, but particularly a US thing.
Hmm.
Well, because and the reason I say it is because in most of Europe, things like stack ranking are illegal. You can't do that.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
you,
Are
you,
performance
you
ratings allowed?
Oh, but performance ratings are allowed. You can do performance appraisals, and you can still sack people if they're not performing.
Hmm.
But you have to go through a process. What
Yeah.
you can't do is say, right, we have 10 people on a team. Every year we're going to get rid of the lowest 3 or whatever it is.
Got
Um,
it.
and and for good reason. And I believe anyway. And
Yep.
so we do see what's interesting is that we see different dynamics around psychological safety emerging in different national cultures, and a lot of that comes down to things like employment law and things like that, because just like you say, or just like you allude to, we are going to be less confident in speaking up with mistakes or concerns or issues or something like that if we think that might push us down that stack rank, or in a different context, if we know that job losses are looming on the horizon, if there's some random redundancies or streamlining
Yep.
or right sizing or whatever we like to call it, to
Yep.
give it a nice name, if we think that's on the horizon, we don't want to stick our head above the parapet and say, yeah, I just must mess up this massive project, or we'll try and suppress that. We'll try and find a way to deal with it without raising it. So there is a tension there. And however much the challenge is that however much managers and leaders in that organization try to foster psychological safety and do things like blameless postmortems, although I personally don't like to use the term postmortem because that means literally after death. I like to use retrospectives, debriefs, after action
Yep.
review, whatever it is.
Yep.
Um, we also like to encourage being blame aware rather than blame less, because I know I'll just touch on this, but in a weird way, trying to be blameless can result in a weird dynamic where people get blamed for blaming. If you Thanks, but because we all have this intrinsic human tendency to blame,
Yeah.
and we'll try not to, but it will naturally emerge, because
Yeah.
we have this desire for cause and effect and blaming and things like that. And so, but better to approach it in a kind of blame aware way that says, that sort of recognizes we will, on occasion, we will find ourselves blaming or find ourselves inclined to blame. And it also kind of implicitly states that I know that you could blame me, but in trusting that you won't, increases that interpersonal um,
Mm.
um, dynamic and closeness between us. So there is a tension between, essentially there always is, and there can be a massive tension between the broader system and the infrastructure in which the organization resides, and the group level or hierarchical, vertical, horizontal psychological safety that exists within an organization. We see the same thing in like the NHS in the UK and things like that,
Mm.
where you've got sort of targets and metrics and things to hit that were intended to have good results, but actually end up having
Yeah.
detrimental impacts. Yeah.
Yeah. So in such an organization, which is, as we speak, most of Silicon Valley, we're in the middle of so many layoffs that were just
Yeah.
announced this week.
Yeah.
And so, is it even possible for mainstream Silicon Valley companies to truly embrace psychological safety and roll it out in their organization? Is that even possible? As long as there is a system, as you talk about, hey, what are the systemic reasons? What's the context that they're embedded in, which includes performance management, ratings, and layoffs, and like, is it even possible? Who are we kidding? If we're
It is.
trying to roll out.
Yeah. It is. It's possible. It's possible, but within constraints, and there are always
Mhm.
constraints. There are always going to be
Mhm.
constraints. It's just that in these organizations, these are the constraints, and they might be greater constraints than we might face in a different organization. And we shouldn't pretend that job losses are not a part of the real world. There is a lot of talk, or we have seen a lot of talk about, psychological safety isn't about job security. Well, no, it isn't. It isn't. But it is important to recognize that job precarity and job insecurity can and does lead to lower psychological safety.
Yes.
And so what we can do as managers and as leaders is recognize that, acknowledge that. That is true. We can't, but denying it doesn't lead anywhere useful. So first step is acknowledging that those constraints exist. Performance reviews and performance gradings and things can damage psychological safety depending on how they're run. And like coming back to metrics, if they're just plain old metrics on a sheet, on a spreadsheet somewhere, then they may be doing more harm than good. How do we measure the impact of the really essential glue person in the team that helps everyone else get their jobs done amazingly well, but has half as many commits as anyone else on the team? And so that, on a metric, depending what metric you use, they might look like the least high performing person on the team, but in fact they're the engine behind the entire team. So this is the other thing. We have to really, whenever we're talking about performance, we have to be really, really careful what we're actually talking about. And remember as well that performance etymologically comes back to sort of a theatrical performance. We can perform with outcomes. What we should be measuring is not the performance of good work, but we should be rewarding the actual good outcomes and the actual effort and insights and adaptation that goes into it.
If there's so many pitfalls when it comes to measurement, what have you seen practically works in organizations that you consult with? It's incredibly hard to put a number against, especially what's a human experience. That's like our own psychology. So how do you actually know that you're making progress?
I think so this is really hard, right? Because it's so contextual. We all do different jobs. The way we measure the success of a firefighter is going to be very different to the way we measure the success of a software developer or a marketing person or someone in the accounts team. And but what we do need to do is make sure that they are as connected as possible to the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and that everyone is aware of what we're actually trying to achieve, and not some vague hand-wavy organizational mission statement that says satisfy our customers in the most effective. Like what? No, like everyone's trying to do that. Like what are we actually trying to do? What are the actual things? And also be honest about it. Like if the actual organization, if the aim of the organization is to make the founder as rich as possible, then name it. That's don't pretend it's something else. But give the people something that they want to achieve and that matters to them. It's what Paul O'Neill did at Alcoa, right? Get people invested in the thing that matters to them, and enable them to do it and get out of their way and give them the tools to do it. And ultimately, look at the outcomes that emerge from that. But also don't get trapped by solely outcome thinking, because we're not actually in charge of our outcomes. The world is a constantly evolving, changing space, and we might try incredibly hard to do something very well, and it doesn't work. So that was a long way of getting to the point, the point really is trying to understand how well we learn. The organizations that learn and embed learning as the outcome, that are generally the highest succeeding organizations, right? If we try to achieve good results, but of course we can't guarantee good results, but the main aim of that process is learning how to do it better next time, then we're going to do good stuff. Over the long term, we're gonna succeed, and people are gonna do a good job. And this is what Toyota do. Toyota are a learning organization. They just happen to also build lots of high quality cars at an ever higher quality and an ever increasing rate.
Mm.
But their focus is on learning, and that's a winning
It's
approach.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's about developing people, the
Yeah.
people in the organization. It's about their development, not just growth, but development
Development
as a
and
human. Yeah,
and the collective capacity for learning, not just how much one person learns or improves,
yeah,
but collective capacity for collective learning and improvement, because we're not islands, right? And this is another part of the problem with going back to that first question about like what's wrong with organizations,
Mhm.
is an organization, just like an ecosystem, is a collection of living things. So as soon as we begin to measure or metricize individual components, i.e. people, in that
Mhm.
system in individualistic terms, then the whole system breaks down,
Yeah,
because they're not individuals in the system. They're parts of a system. We're part of a bigger thing. So this tension between this sort of individualistic approach and the
yeah,
collectivist approach is
yeah,
fascinating to me.
yeah. As much as I hate calling people part of a system, like,
Yeah,
as a cog
yeah,
that you can
yeah,
change, but nonetheless, I think what you're alluding to is also resonating from the lens of local optimizations.
yeah,
If every person is chasing to be A grade, or exceeds performance, and
yeah,
they're all fighting amongst each other, the collective uh, is not going to be as effective. This is this traditional age old lens of local optimization versus global effectiveness, right? Local
yeah,
optima versus global optima,
yeah.
as well. And in really, like, what type of a environment are you creating for the people there? And that largely explains the collective outcome of the organization as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. You know, the Akov's kind of stuff, and like
Mhm.
can't improve if we improve any part of a system without regard
In
for the rest of it
isolation.
in
Yes.
isolation, and and this is just ecology. This is ecological thinking, and
Yeah,
yeah, and no man is an island, right? You know, we're all part of a bigger thing.
absolutely. Tom, as we wrap up, this is a standard question that I ask all of my
Mm.
guests. So the cybersyn community has many technology practitioners and executives, or a tech executive listening to this podcast right now, and who wants to take one concrete action this week, not a transformation program or a culture
Yeah.
change program. If there's one thing that they can change as a human, one behavioral change, what can they do to improve the effectiveness of their organization?
Oh, you know, and this is where there are so many things I could say,
Mhm.
um, but I think, you know, if we going back to what really makes a difference is speaking to the people, so humbly, with
Mhm.
humility, speaking to the people doing the work, and asking them what they need, what would help them get that job done, and help them enjoy their work as well. You know, work doesn't have to suck.
Mhm.
We've embedded this weird belief that if we're enjoying it, then it's not work. So ask them what they need, what would help them get their job done, um, and improve their work. And there's an important caveat here, which is that the first time you ask that, you're not you'll hear something, but
Mhm.
you won't hear the big picture and the big stuff and the real deep stuff. We need to keep asking that question, and we need to keep creating the context in which people can honestly and candidly answer that question. Because part of that answer might be back to you saying, "Well, you need to stop doing this, or you need to change the way you do that, or you need to get out of our way." And it's very hard for people to say that
Yeah.
to a leader. So
Yeah.
yeah, create the conditions. So ask those questions, but also create the conditions in which those questions can be candidly answered.
Mhm. Yes. Well said. any other questions I should have asked but didn't, or any parting remarks for the
Oh,
listeners?
you know what? I'd be happy to talk about this for so long, and I could list off questions, and maybe maybe let's make a
Mhm.
document and we can add it to the next time we do an issue, next time we do an episode. But I no, I think that's fantastic, and I really appreciate your time today, and I really hope that that these little ripples of change, that we can spark just a few ideas and plant a few little seeds in a few people's heads, and before you know it, we'll have changed the entire ecosystem of work without us even knowing.
Yeah, that's music to my ears, Tom. I think these ideas, what you are striving for, what you're working for, are ideas worth spreading. And I'm just trying to do my little part in spreading those ideas. And so thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing the insights with our listeners. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you.